Hello everybody, Wolfpack here, and this video is the long-awaited TDC tutorial that I have been working on. And oh boy, it's a lot more comprehensive than I originally anticipated. In this video, I will show you how to calculate a proper torpedo firing solution in both the C-37 and S-3 torpedo data computer and U-boat. It's important to mention though that these methods will apply to any submarine simulation with a TDC. This video will be broken up into chapters to allow you to skip around and find the information you need. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you do want to see more tutorials, let me know what you think I should do next. Also, feel free to leave a like and also subscribe, it really helps the channel out. First, we are going to take a look at the basics, gathering information needed for a proper torpedo attack. Every torpedo firing solution requires 3 pieces of data to be successful. These consist of range, angle on bow, and the speed of the target. Once these 3 pieces of information have been collected, they will be plugged into the torpedo data computer, which will spit out a firing solution for your torpedoes. Range is one of the easier values to acquire, and generally is one of the more forgiving measurements, especially if at close range and at firing at a right angle. To gather range, you first must identify the target that you are aiming at. Once that is acquired, you can use the statometer tool to gather the range. With this tool, you must line up the duplicate image as waterline to the top of the mast. Once that is done, you will receive your range. Of course, if you would like, you can always double check your reading on the map and acquire your range that way if using map contact updates. Later in the war, U-boats were equipped with radar and sonar, which could have been used to gather the target's range if the tactical situation permitted. The ASW threat in the Atlantic made it very difficult to utilize both of these pieces of equipment. This was far more common with the American fleet boats. Regardless, as of writing this, neither sonar nor radar can be equipped on your boat in the game, U-boat. Angle on bow is one thing that can really trip people up, but it is much easier than you think. First, let's define angle on bow. Angle on bow is the angle from the target ship in degrees to your submarine. One way that I personally visualize this is I imagine that I am a lookout on the target ship's bridge and looking at the submarine's periscope. That would be your angle on the bow. Let's break down AOB a bit further. The angle on bow is split into degrees. It is on a scale of 0 to 180 degrees. So one half of the circle is left and one half is right, port and starboard respectively. Now let's also remember that port is red and starboard is green. If the angle on bow is cutting into you, the AOB is less than 90 degrees. You can tell it's less than 90 if you can see the front of the ship's island. If the target's stern is moving away and you can kind of see the rear of the target's island, the angle on bow is greater than 90 degrees. If the target is dead on center and all masts are perfectly aligned, AOB is directly at 90 degrees. One thing that is tricky with angle on bow is that with a moving target, the angle on bow is always moving. This makes plugging in data with the C-37 TDC rather difficult, as these parameters do not automatically update with the computer. However, with the S-3 TDC, the computer will automatically update changes in angle on bow. Let's do some examples now. Let's assume we have a target with an AOB of 90 degrees. Now we need to establish if the AOB is port or starboard. If the target is moving left and the port side of the ship is facing you, then the target's angle on bow will be 90 degrees port. If the target is moving right and the starboard side of the ship is facing you, then the angle on bow will be 90 degrees starboard. A general rule of thumb is torpedo attack should be conducted with an angle on bow of around 80 to 100 degrees. To ensure the maximum chance of a hit and reducing the dud chance. Once again, if a target has an angle on bow of 90, everything will be lined up. This is generally a great place to start and work from if the angle on bow is less than or greater than 90. If angle on bow continues to really trip you up, then it's good to just check your work on the map using the tools in game. This may help you visualize things a little bit better. Hopefully that explanation of AOB is good enough. It is one of the main things that trips new skippers up and they have the most trouble with, so I really tried to go in depth with it. Now on to speed, possibly the second most complex reading. Lots of U-boat skippers would match their speed with the target speed as they tracked them on the surface to get a rough idea of what the speed of the target ship was. Additionally, like most of these readings, U-boat skippers got pretty good at just guessing it. However, we will go over some more precise methods to get the target speed. One method I personally use often is the fixed wire method. This requires your U-boat to be at a standstill, and you time the target as it crosses your optic wire from bow to stern. Once you have how long it took the ship to travel in seconds, you take the ship's length and divide it by the number of seconds. You then multiply that value by 2 to get the target speed in knots, or you can multiply it by 1.852 if you want to be more precise. In my experience, 2 works fine. Now I know what you're asking. What if your U-boat cannot be at a complete stop? In that case, your bow must be facing directly at the target whenever you are timing it, right at 0 degrees. This will negate the fact that your U-boat is moving and give you a more accurate reading. In reality, depth keeping was impossible if a U-boat was at a complete standstill underwater. This is why we must be crawling at around 2 knots to maintain depth. So to get the target speed, you turn your U-boat's bow towards the target and time how long it takes the target ship to cross the wire at 0 degrees relative. Another method that works great is the 3-minute and 15-second method. This method will have you marking the ship's position on the map and starting the stopwatch. You will wait for 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Once completed, you will then draw a line from point 1 to point 2. The distance between the 2 points per 100 meters will give you the ship speed in knots. For example, a ship that moves 700 meters over the course of 3 minutes and 15 seconds is moving at a speed of 7 knots. In the footage you're looking at now, this warship has traveled 594 meters over the course of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Therefore, she is moving 5.94 knots. It is important to mention that the base game does allow you to establish the target speed by timing it from bow to stern. This is very similar to the fixed wire method, but your boat does not have to be at a dead stop or heading straight for the target, making it slightly less realistic. That being said, it is still something you can utilize if you'd rather not use these other methods. Now that we have gone over gathering information, let's take a look at plugging all this info into the fire control boxes and TDC. Before we begin to plot a torpedo attack, there are 2 things that need to happen. We need to have one officer assigned to whatever optic we would like to use, the attack periscope in this case, and then we need another officer assigned to the torpedo calculator here. They will all be in the conning tower as you can see. Once that is done, you are ready to start plugging in your information. Here we are looking at the torpedo fire control boxes. There are 4 dials here that we can manipulate, and these essentially set up what torpedoes you are going to fire and from which tubes. Our first dial here on the left is our active bearing transmitter. We have 3 options here. We have the attack periscope, the ouzo, and the observation periscope. You will select whichever optic you are looking through to gather the information on the target. For an underwater attack, generally this will be the attack scope, and for a surface attack, it will be the ouzo. The second dial to the right here is the target gyro angle receiver. We will set this to whichever tubes we are firing from. If we are firing from the bow torpedo tubes, we will set it to the bow. If we are firing from the stern torpedo tubes, we will set it to the stern. Our launch mode is what torpedo tube we are utilizing. Tubes 1 through 4 are your bow torpedo tubes, and tube 5 is the stern tube on the Type 7 U-boats. Additionally, if we wanted to fire a salvo of multiple torpedoes, we would set our launch mode to salvo. If we wanted to fire a salvo during a turn, we can set it to that mode, although this is not recommended. It really just creates a larger margin for error. So there is that. If we are firing a salvo, then we need to select a salvo type. We can fire all 4 bow tubes or select a couple of tubes, like tubes 1 and 2, for example. The dial next to the right is the active launch lever. We can use this and set it to the bridge or the ouzo. If we have it set to the bridge, we use this lever on the bottom left-hand corner to fire our torpedoes. If we have it set to ouzo, we can use the UI button on the bottom of the screen to fire our torpedoes. Here we are in the bow torpedo room, and there's a few things that we need to go over up here. We have our valves on all of our torpedo tubes and launch levers on all of our tubes. Additionally, we have the bow gyro angle receiver. I would mostly keep this set to automatic, although we do have our salvo size here, which will adjust the gyro angles so your spread is appropriately spread towards the target. So if we are firing a salvo of 2, we will fire tubes probably 1 and 2. Why not? 1 and 2. There we go. And let's switch this to salvo. Now, our torpedoes are getting ready to fire. We need to flood the tubes. So let's flood tubes 1 and flood tubes 2. You can see the tubes are now flooding. We have a G7A torpedo and then a G7E torpedo in tube 1. We are going to set a depth of 3 meters. This is where you would adjust your depth. If your torpedoes have magnetic pistols, you want your torpedo to explode underneath the hull of the target ship. So you would set it 1 meter deeper than the draft of the target ship. You could set it more, but generally 1 meter is recommended. And if we wanted to fire from the bow torpedo room, we could indeed do that and click the torpedo launch lever. There we go, tube 2's away. Here we are taking a look at the C-37 TDC. This version of the TDC was introduced in 1937, and it is capable of calculating the maximum distance to target, deflection angle, and gyro angle. This information is transmitted to the torpedo tubes in preparation for firing. There are 4 dials that we are primarily concerned with when conducting a torpedo attack. Those dials will be outlined here in red. From top to bottom, the dials are as follows. The top dial, we select if we want to fire from the bow or stern torpedo tube. When it's switched over to the right, we are firing from the bow tubes. The next dial is our range dial. This range dial is in hundreds of meters, so if we set it to 6.5 like it's set now, the target range will be 650 meters. If we set it to 30, the target range will be 3,000 meters. If we go down 1, we have our target speed. This speed is in knots. Currently, it's set to around 24 knots. We move this up and down to match the target speed we have previously calculated. And then to the left of that, we have target angle on bow. You can see this dial is split into a port and starboard, port being red, starboard being green, and it is 180 degrees for each side. Currently, the target's angle on bow is 60 degrees port. Therefore, we are looking at the port side of the target ship, and she is moving to the left. This box to the right has 2 settings, Nachfolgen and Folgen. This is follow and not follow. So if we want our TDC to update with the periscope's bearing, we will set it to follow. And if not, we will set it to not follow, like it is set right now. Generally, you would want this set to follow during a torpedo attack, unless you have a TDC solution all set up and you are waiting for the ship just to cross that particular relative bearing to fire. The C-37 TDC is rather rudimentary, especially compared to its S-3 counterpart. The C-37 will only update the target bearing from the periscope, and it will only do this if it is slaved to the periscope using this lever on the right. The TDC bearing will automatically update with the periscope if selected. Other than that, the information plugged into the C-37 TDC will give you a torpedo firing solution for that moment in time, just a snapshot. Angle on bow and range will not automatically update with the U-boat or target's movements. There are a few other dials that I would like to show off, however, and one of those is the target bearing. Our captain is currently tracking a target that is bearing 018 degrees relative, and she is moving slowly to the right, as you can see. If we were to fire a torpedo at this current angle, the torpedo would have to turn on a heading of 30 degrees to intercept and impact the target. This is indeed doable, although it is getting out of ideal launch parameters. Generally, you want the torpedo's gyro angle to be as close to 0 when firing. The last thing that we need to talk about is salvos. If you are launching a salvo at a target that is 140 meters long, you would set this target length to 140 meters. The TDC will automatically calculate an appropriate salvo spread for you. If you think this is too wide, then you just reduce the target length. Generally, the salvo spread that is suggested by the TDC is indeed wide, and it is possible that one of your torpedoes will go forward or aft of the target. If you are unconfident in your solution and want a wider spread, you just make the target length even longer. We will conduct an underwater torpedo attack utilizing the C-37 TDC. First thing first though, we need to establish the speed of the target. The good thing is when attacking a convoy, generally if you establish the speed of one ship in the convoy, you have the speed for the rest of them. We will try to get the speed of this target right here. We are turning so the bow of our boat is facing 0 degrees relative. We will utilize the fixed wire method to establish the target speed this time. So looking at the target, we first need to identify her. We can see she has a mast, funnel, and a mast. Looking at it, it is an Empire Explorer type freighter. We can also see the length of the target is 123.9 meters. We will just round up to 124 to make things a little easier. And here we go, begin. Starting our stopwatch now as the Empire Envoy here crosses our wire. We already know the target's length is 124 meters. So we will divide that by however many seconds it takes for the ship to cross our wire from bow to stern. And it looks like 42 seconds. Stop that, 42 seconds. So we are going to take 124, divide it by 42, and multiply that by 2. That will give us a reading of 5.9 knots. Perfect. Now that we have the speed of the convoy, we need to pick out a target. We have the target locked up that I'd like. We need to identify her. It's mast, funnel, mast, and then a king post back there. And this is actually a good way to try to establish the target's angle on bow. We are locked on target and we can see the masts are not lined up. Also, if we are seeing the front of the target's bridge, we know the angle on bow is less than 90 degrees. Additionally, we are looking at the right side or starboard side of the target, so we know the AOB is starboard. I'm eyeballing this, and it looks like her angle on bow is 50 or so degrees starboard at the moment. Going over to the C-37 TDC, the first thing that we need to input is the torpedo speed. You have 3 options for a G7A torpedo: 30 knots, 40 knots, and 44 knots. The 44 knot speed setting was rarely used, mainly because it really pushed the torpedoes quite hard. We will set it to 40 knots just to show it off. Let's check our torpedo tubes and see where we have a G7A loaded. It looks like we have a G7A loaded in tube number 2. So we will be firing a G7A out of tube 2 using a speed setting of 40 knots. Now we need to set the angle on bow. By this point, it's probably more than 55 degrees. We'll go 60 degrees starboard, and we also know her speed is 6 knots. Additionally, we will now get the range to target. Let's find her. Where is she? Our captain was looking behind us. There is our target, and angle on bow. Oh, much, much better. Let's get distance to target, and set this. And looking at it, she's moving pretty quickly. Range is 1.3 kilometers. So we're going to go to the TDC, and we're going to set this to 1,300 meters. Set. Close enough. And angle on bow, we are going to set to 74 degrees starboard. Our parallax angle mode is set to forward. We can see our target bearing is now 1.6 degrees, and our torpedo gyro angle is 11. So the torpedo will turn 11 degrees to get onto target. We are now tracking the target, and let's go to the fire control boxes. We are going to shoot no salvo. We are going to launch tube number 2 here, and our gyro angle receiver is the bow, transmitting through the attack scope. Active launch lever will be in the bridge. Go to the bow torpedo room, flood the tubes, and whenever you are firing at a different speed, you will set it up here to 40 knots. And looking at it, angle on bow, you can see we're starting to see less and less of the front of the bridge, and these masts are starting to slowly align. If you can pretty much only see one mast, then that's how you know your angle on bow is 90. Because the C-37 doesn't automatically update AOB, we are going to adjust this 80 degrees starboard. And we are now ready to fire. Range has probably decreased a little bit. Let's adjust that. Our torpedo is now shooting at a gyro angle of 21 degrees. This isn't fantastic, but it should get the job done. Tube 2, los! Our torpedo will rush out the tube. Angle on bow looks pretty good. And if we go over to the map, we can see our torpedo. Now, I am just curious, what is the target's AOB at the moment? And let's not turn here. Well, let's see. Angle on bow is, yep, 85 degrees starboard. We are looking at the target, and I put something like 85 degrees. So over time, I have gotten quite good at identifying what the target's AOB is. It really just takes a lot of practice, that is for sure. 30 seconds to impact. Hopefully we manage to get a impact here. And let's go to the periscope and watch the target and see if we get a hit.
20 Sekunden.
20 seconds to impact. It could very well be a dud. Duds do happen. And the torpedo was a dud, but we know the torpedo managed to hit. Now, because our TDC is not updating, we have to go. Let's fire a second torpedo. Rudder amidships. Rudder amidships. And look, this angle on bow, that's past 90 degrees. We're starting to see the second mast there, but it is moving past 90 degrees starboard. So let's go 95 starboard. Range, reduce it a little bit. Still firing through the bow, and we're going to set the torpedo speed to 30 knots. Let's go over to the tubes, and what do we want to fire? Probably a G7E. Flood it. Torpedo depth 3 meters using a impact pistol. And we will now set this to tube 1. I know I said tube 3. I meant tube 1. All right, tube 1. Track it, tube 1. Go to the TDC and dos. Tube 1 should be away. All right, tube 1, hopefully running hot, straight, and normal towards the target. The angle on bow is increasing as we are starting to see the rear of the ship's island. It's probably around 100 degrees starboard right now. Let's take a look at the map and see what our solution is like. Now, the torpedo had to turn quite aggressively to make its way towards the target, and if this one is a dud, that would be just comedic. Torpedo should impact at any second now. We will be informed if it was a dud. There we go, impact right underneath the funnel, and that is how it's done. Plugging in information to the S3 torpedo data computer is actually very similar to that of the C-37. Let's go over the dials that are needed for a proper torpedo attack. They are the same as in the C-37. The dial to the top right is your parallax angle switch. This needs to be switched to bow or stern depending on what torpedo tubes you are using. Tubes 1 through 4 are bow, 5 is stern. The target speed dial is to the left and once again is set in knots. The next dial is the range dial, and just like the C-37, this dial is in hundreds of meters. Target angle on bow is on the bottom of the TDC. It is split into port and starboard, port being red and starboard being green. The following lever is to the right of the TDC once again. This will slave your optic to the TDC, updating the TDC with the current bearing that your optic is looking at. Now we are going to get into some of the new features that the S3 TDC has compared to the C-37. There are 3 motor switches that can be toggled off or on, 2 of which are on the bottom of the TDC and 1 is on the top. The most important one that you need to have enabled is the angle on bow motor. This will make sure that the angle on bow will continue to update with the target's relative bearing. This is one of the core features of the S3 TDC, allowing the TDC to continuously track the target and make sure your firing solution is continuously updated. The other 2 motors are turned on by default. This is a spread angle motor, which generates a proper spread angle for a salvo shot, and the parallax motor, which will automatically calculate the parallax angle. Generally, there is no need to switch these off. Next, let's talk about some lights. There are 3 lamps that can illuminate on the TDC. The far rightmost lamp is a blue lamp, and it will illuminate whenever your periscope or Uzo is not coupled to the TDC. Go check your fire control boxes and make sure the follow lever is enabled. The white lamp in the middle indicates whether the firing solution by the TDC is synchronized with the torpedo firing angle receiver in the bow. If this lamp is not illuminated, once again, check the fire control boxes. And last but not least, we have an error lamp. This lamp will illuminate if the solution plugged into the TDC is not possible. Even if this lamp is on, be warned that your torpedoes can still fire. That is the primary information that you need to know regarding what to plug in to the S3 TDC. Next, we will move on to a practical example. I will now conduct a practical torpedo attack utilizing the S3 TDC. First things first though, I want to head over to the torpedo fire control boxes and make sure everything's set up here. We are attacking underwater, utilizing our attack scope to gather all of the target information. Therefore, our active bearing transmitter will be set to attack periscope. Our target gyro angle receiver will be set to bow, as I am planning on firing my bow torpedo tubes first. Launch mode, we can just set to tube 1 for the time being, and active launch lever will be set to bridge. When this is set to bridge, I will be using the lever to the left of the TDC to fire my torpedoes. Now, we want to make sure our parallax mode is also set to forward as I'm firing my bow torpedo tubes. And let's go ahead and slave this to the attack periscope. So therefore, our target bearing will automatically adjust with what our captain's looking at. We'll just line this up at 0 degrees. And it should come all the way over to 0 degrees here. There we go, target bearing 0 degrees, and it is slowly updating with whatever our captain is looking at. Now let's adjust this and see what we have in front of us. Lots of ships to choose from, and we need to get the speed of the convoy. So let's choose a ship that's pretty much right in front of us, actually. Let's come right just a little bit. Looks like we have a C3 cargo here. Let's see, C3 cargo, the target length is 143 meters. Now, if the target length is 143 meters, we will use the fixed wire method to establish the speed of this target. Let's line up our wire with 0 degrees relative, and now we are going to wait for the C3 cargo to cross the wire here. If we get the speed of one target in the convoy, we will have the speed of all of them. The bow of the target is about to cross 0 degrees. Let's get ready to start the stopwatch and start. There we go, timing from bow to stern. We can see the target's angle on bow is going to be starboard. We are looking at the right side of the ship. And also the angle on bow here is greater than 90 as we're starting to see the rear of the island. Okay, passing 15 seconds. Let's get ready to stop this whenever the wire hits the stern of the ship. And set. There we go. Okay, so we got 27, 28 seconds. So that gives us, so 143 divided by 28 gives us 5.1. We multiply that by 2, and that gets us 10. This convoy is moving at a speed of 10 knots. We are going to come left just a little bit, so we are better angled at the rest of the convoy. Let's go to our TDC and set this. Target speed, 10 knots. Set. Let's find a target that I would like to shoot at. And I'm liking the look of that tanker. That tanker could prove to be a very interesting target indeed. So let's lock onto the tanker. Lock onto her. And find where she is in the recognition manual so we can get her speed, or her range, excuse me. So I have her recognized here as a Dale class. Let's recognize the target and get the range to the target. To get range, we are going to line up the water line with the top of the mast there. Set. Distance 3.6 kilometers. We are going to set this to 3.6 or 3,600 meters. Set. Now let's try to get angle on bow. It's about 45 degrees starboard at this point. We can also double check that on the map. I'm gonna go 49 degrees starboard. So we're going to set that And now we are going to turn the angle on bow motor on. Now our angle on bow will update with the target bearing. If we wanted to go to the map and double check our work, we can get the protractor here and see what her angle on bow is. And yeah, 45 degrees. So I was pretty close with guesstimating there. Let's just adjust it a little bit. There we go, set. You can indeed adjust your angle on bow when the motor is enabled. Now, at this point, we really just need to wait. We have our solution set up. The only thing that's going to change really is range, and we will need to update that. But we are slave to the periscope. Our angle on bow motor is enabled. Parallax mode is set to forward. Speed of the target is 10 knots. Let's just adjust that ever so slightly, make it a nice even 10. And now we are really just waiting. Everything will update except range. We will get a final range reading before we attack. But we are waiting for the gyro angle to get closer to 0 than it currently is. When this is close to 0, that is when we will fire our torpedo. A good practice, if you are just waiting around and are not in a hurry, is to always double check your measurements. In this case, I decided to double check my speed. As a matter of fact, it was a good thing I did it because my speed was off by 2 knots. When I retimed this target, it looks like the convoy speed was 8 knots instead of the original 10. Variations and mistakes will always happen. That's why it's always good to double check. The time has come to fire our torpedoes. Let's get one last snapshot of the target's range. And set 1,900 meters. Let's set that into the TDC. You know, this is a rather large tanker though, so I'm thinking maybe we should launch a salvo at it. Let's go ahead and set that up. We are going to set up a salvo here, and we are going to launch tubes 1 and 2. Let's go to the bow torpedo room and go up to the gyro angle receiver panel. Salvo size 2. Let's flood tubes 1 and flood tubes 2. I'll set the depth for both torpedoes to be 4 meters.
Rohr 1 bewässert.
Let's go to the TDC. Now, for a proper spread, we should set the target length to the target length of the ship. However, if we set it to the length of this tanker, it will be a rather wide spread. I want it to be relatively narrow, so we are just going to set it to 105 meters. There we go. Everything is set. Everything's looking good. Target bearing is 339. Our gyro angle is 354. Close enough to 0 for me. Tubes 1 and 2, los. I have not touched our AOB since the original input. It's now at 72 degrees starboard. This is all automatically updated. Let's take a look at the target. There she is, and you know what? 72 degrees starboard looks pretty darn good to me. The torpedo should impact the target at any second now. We'll see how effective that spread was if we manage to get both torpedoes to hit the target with the spread or just one. Even if we hit with just one, that would be a success. You can see the target's angle on bow is closing in on 90 degrees starboard here. There we go, impact right in the bow. Now let's see, there we go, there's a second torpedo. That was the result of that spread. Very good, and that tanker went up in flames and is sinking. Well folks, that is going to do it for this here tutorial video. I do hope you all liked it. It was a lot of work, a lot more than I anticipated, but hopefully it helped explain things. If you would like to see more tutorials, be sure to leave a like and comment, as it really does help out the channel. But until next time, this is Wolfpack345 signing off, and I'll see you all on the next one.